Everyone, happy Thursday to all of you out there, or if you're rewatching it, it might perhaps be a different day, but Thursday morning here, and as you can probably see from my relatively lightweight top, it's kind of sunny and bright and a little bit warm, which is really nice. Now, if I seem a little bit dopey today, I probably am. I had some back problems for the last couple of days that are almost resolved now, but I've got some nice heavy-duty painkillers and muscle relaxants from the doctor, and I think it's making me a little bit spacey. So yeah, if I'm not quite on the ball or I lose track of my train of thoughts, I'm going to blame the medication, okay? But in case you're wondering, because most people usually do ask, the top I'm wearing is called Spritz Stripes, S-P-R-I-T-Z Stripes. And this version is the one that is made in Madeline Tosh. I think it's Tosh Light. It's a singles fingering weight, but like a heavy fingering weight merino. And there is a second version, but it's downstairs, and it's Spritz Stripes Nua, and it's a slightly heavier gauge, and it uses Nua sports weight. But the basics of the pattern are the same. It's just the gauge has been changed, and so the number of stitches and things like that is slightly altered. Other than that, the two are the same pattern. So what I wanted to talk to you about today was cotton, and kind of talk about different things that are going on with cotton and plant fibers in general, because I've been having a few discussions. If you kind of pop down to my grid, you might see that one of the questions that I had popped up there was I was asking people if they knit with cotton yarn and what they thought of it, and to just kind of get the discussion going. And I discovered that people have a lot of thoughts on cotton yarn. Like, it, as with an awful lot of questions in relation to knitting, it seems to divide into two fairly extreme camps of people really loving it or really hating it. With there's a little bit of middle ground, but less so. People seem to be on the extremes. So I was going to talk a bit about my own experiences of cotton yarn and things you can do to make it a more pleasant experience, and when you might want to use cotton yarns as well, really. And I'll kind of finish up with showing a few patterns that I have that I think would work well in cotton yarns, because some of the patterns I've got, they're not necessarily designed in cotton yarn, but the shaping and the way it's put together would translate fairly well into it. And so it'll probably lead on fairly naturally from what I'm talking about in relation to cotton yarn in general, and pros and cons and things you can look for both in a pattern and how you're knitting it to make it more comfortable. And if you keep watching, or even come back to look at the IGTV later on, or if we pop it up in YouTube in time, I'm doing a giveaway as well. So remind me if I forget to say it before I finish, to tell you about that at the end as well. But first, I'll start talking about cotton. And as well, as we're going through, if you've got some questions, like ideally in relation to cotton or your experiences with it, just pop them up there in the feed and I'll go ahead and read them out. I'm just watching everyone. Thank you all for popping in. Hopefully this will be interesting, all of our little discussion on cotton yarn. So the first one we're going to talk about is just types of cotton yarn, because there's huge variation. And sometimes people will go and they'll talk about loving or hating cotton yarn and working with it, and they may be talking about two totally different things. So sometimes, like, I've had ones which you don't get it so much in Ireland, but particularly in the States, what people will call dishcloth cotton. And usually it's lightly spun, so it tends to separate out easily. It's fairly rough and there's no shine to it, but it's designed to be very durable, so that if you're using it for things like dishcloths, for actually washing, not drying, washing the dishes, it holds up well, and it's got a little bit of roughness to it. So it is in fact designed to be a little rougher, so it's obviously not as pleasant to knit with. The one behind me here is a coral yarn, and what that is, it's a mercerized cotton, and that's got a kind of a coating on the outside, which means that it's much more easily dyed. And so when you actually dye that type of cotton, what happens is it gets a really nice shine to it, the color is really vivid and bright and holds very well. And in my experience, when you're washing it, you don't get dye runoff because it actually stays on the yarn when you're knitting with it, which is always an advantage. So like usually mercerized will tend to, that's what you're looking at, it fairly tightly spun and a little bit of shine, usually bright colors. There's other ones then as well, like a Pima cotton, I'm probably pronouncing that, Pima cotton. It doesn't tend to be mercerized, so it's not going to have that shine to it, but it's particularly soft cotton, so it's very pleasant to knit with. One thing you need to watch out with it, sometimes it is so soft that it does tend to have, a lot of fluff can come off it. So if you're using it for baby garments, you might want to be careful, just test out to see if that happens. If it does, you might perhaps want to pre-wash, put it in a tumble dryer, something like that, just like not in a hot heat, but just to try and take some of the excess fluff so it doesn't get in people's eyes and things like that. But that's a very different type of cotton. But it's very pleasant to knit with because it's soft, and it's going to be as soft as a cotton gets. In relation to cotton as well, I suppose the other thing that comes up a lot is that because it's that and plant fibers, there's no inherent elasticity in it, as in when you stretch it, you're not going to get a spring back the way you will with wool. And it does mean you're going to knit with it a little bit differently, because things like if you've got a very tight tension, you're going to end up with sore wrists, sore fingers, and it's going to be very uncomfortable to work with. So I would suggest, if possible, loosening your tension a little when you work with knitting with cotton. Don't grip it quite so tightly. Now, that might mean to get gauge, you might need to drop down a needle size, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get an uneven tension, because if you're consistent with how you're gripping it, it's not going to it's not going to get a kind of a loose, tight thing going through it. But I do find that I have to be careful to not grip too tightly with cotton. Cotton, there's a question up here, what about cotton and wool blends? How do they behave? It's actually a lovely combination. Cotton and wool, I find, tends to have the best of both qualities, because you can get some of the really nice bright colors of cotton and also a bit more lightness in terms of wearing, but the wool tends to give it a small little bit of bounce to it. Hey Karen, thanks for joining in. So that works quite well. If you don't have a blend, but you've got a lightweight cotton and a lightweight wool, you can also do things like combining them, hold a strand of each together, and it's going to modify the sense of how it works together. The other thing then as well is, when you're looking at cottons, is the comfort level of working with it. It depends as well on what you're knitting with, as in, hang on, tell us more about coral cotton that you have. I'll come back to coral. But yeah, what you're knitting them with is the type of needles. So whether it's metal, or metal with a little, sometimes they have a coating which makes it a little bit stickier, or wood, bamboo makes a big difference. A lot of people find that wood is more comfortable, or bamboo is more comfortable to knit with cotton, because of the fact that it's got inherently a bit of natural grip, so that you can possibly work a little bit more easily. So when the discussion came up, I found that there was quite a few people said, I find bamboo or wood much more comfortable to work with than metal, because it basically will grip the yarn a little. Oddly enough, I tested both before. When I took out coral, first of all, and I started working with it, I swatched first of all with the bamboo, assuming that would be the case. But then I pulled out, I've got a pair of signature needles, which very sharp point, and they're metal, but there's kind of a slight coating on it, which makes them a little bit less slippy. And for whatever reason, I found that the most comfortable to work with. So I definitely think that there's a big difference, but people's views vary hugely. So before you make a judgment call on one versus the other, I'd say take both needles out and alternate between them as you're swatching, so that you get a really good feel. What about cotton and linen? Any benefits to this combination? My worry about not cotton and linen, cotton and silk. Cotton and silk could run into the problem of being quite heavy. Silk is a very dense fibre, and if you're looking for something that has got a lot of drape, maybe it's something that is oversized and designed to, if it's a garment, or in the case of a shawl, it would be quite nice. But I wouldn't be inclined to go for a silk cotton blend for a garment. I think that you'll get a huge amount of stretch in it because it would just be very heavy. So I've had a couple of questions there about the coral yarn I stock. Here we go. Let's pull this over. This is just one of them here. If you can see this here, it's sports weight one, and it's a fairly standard cotton yarn, but I find it quite pleasant to work with just because it's not too heavy. That for me with cotton is quite important, is like a sports weight is about as heavy as I find comfortable to work with, because otherwise also with the finished garments, the sheer weight of the cotton is going to stretch things out of shape. So that weight is particularly good. Let me see if I can find another one here. If you can see here, this is another fuchsia color. You see there's a good bit of shine on that, and that is because the cotton is mercerized before it's dyed. Or maybe it's after it's dyed. I'm not sure of the process. But what it means is that's why you get the really bright colors. Cotton and linen, would it be more pleasant than just cotton for garments? That varies a lot by people. I like both. I actually find cotton easier to knit with than linen. Linen it washes well, but when you're working with it, again, I'm generalizing because there's a few different linen ones out there, but with linen, what ends up, I find the general one is it's a little bit stiffer. So cotton probably would make the linen a little easier to work with, and tensioning is even more difficult with linen. So it is lovely to wear though, and it washes very well. And also the construction of it can be a bit different. I've come across some linen blends, which are even just plain linen, which are done in what's a chain neck construction. So instead of the yarn plied or twisted together and plied together, it's done like it's this little series of chains, like a little tube of knitting. So that gives it a bit more stretch, even though the actual fibre itself doesn't have any. So it's in fact my favorite, I think, is Shibui. I could be wrong on that because it's been a couple of years since I've done it, but I found that very, very comfortable. Now here, someone's asking, what about washing your garment? Water seems to weigh it down and change the shape. When I wash cotton garments, because they tend to be fairly good in terms, you're not so worried about things shrinking, I'll soak them the same way as I do, again in whatever wool wash or general hand wash that I'm going to do. And then I have got a front loading washing machine, and so I'll often put them in the front loading washing machine, turn the spin away down to like usually about 800 or maybe even 600. And then when it comes out, I'm not trying to wring it or squeeze it by hand as much, so it's got less weight from the water. And then I just block it the same as anything else. I flatten it out carefully and I'll dry it flat. In terms of the length of time for it to dry, that helps as well, because it's not retaining quite as much moisture in it, because you've spun a little bit out as it comes. When you're drying it flat, you don't really have the problem with it being stretched out of shape, because it's not hanging under its own weight as it's wet. I'm not going to hang it upright. So that's just a couple of the things in relation to how you go about looking at different cotton and yarns. There's another question here. What yarn weight is coral? It's sports weight, but it is a lighter sports weight. So if you've knit with Nua before, that is definitely on the heavier end of sports weight. It's almost into a double knitting or DK weight, whereas the sports weight in this is a good bit lighter. And in fact, the recommended needle size is quite small. It's 2.5 to 3.5 millimeter needles. So it goes to the other extreme where it's really just touching on the upper end of fingering, going into the lower side of sports weight. I find that it helps a little bit in terms of not having too much weight. So Shibui Rain is the chainette yarn. Thanks, Elsa. I appreciate it. Yeah, so that if you do find cottons and plant fibers hard to knit with, take a look for, but you would like something that's lighter weight for the summer, or perhaps your climate is just very warm. Take a look at chainette constructions, or possibly the idea of holding a strand, or combinations of it with a more elastic fiber, or holding strands of two together. I haven't tried a lot, but to make sure you don't have the weight, you probably want to go for very lightweight, so like fingering weights of each of them, so when you combine them it's not getting too thick. So that's pretty important. Now, in terms of trying to figure out what things you can knit with in plant fibers and in cotton fibers, obviously if a garment or if a shawl or an accessory has been designed in cotton, then you would hope that it's probably going to work well in a cotton yarn. However, if you're looking at another design, another garment, and you're wondering whether it's going to translate well into cotton, there's a few tips that I would suggest. The first one is look for things that are a little undersized, like not long slide sleeves, not terribly long body, a little bit more fitted, so that it's just physically, it's just a smaller amount of fiber. Also means if it's got a cropped or a slightly shorter style, it's also, if it does stretch a little, it'll still look fine. It's not going to get really oversized or extremely long. Avoid anything oversized that's not fitted to your body. I'm not talking about the size that it's knit in, just in terms of the size of your body, that it's not terribly oversized, because if it does stretch, it's really going to look too big, or anything that's very long, because the physical weight of the plant fiber is going to make it more inclined to pull. The other thing is the weight of the yarn. I wouldn't go for, like, even a light DK is the most I would work with, but realistically, to be happier with the end outcome, I think kind of sports weight or fingering weight are going to be better options, because just as a thinner yarn, a smaller stitch, so it's overall going to be less weight. The other thing, both with what I'm wearing here and also with my Dusty Roads back here, is lace is great, because lace doesn't have as much weight. It also is easier to knit, because with lace you're trying to have a more open gauge, which means you can actually ease up on the tension. So it's much more physically comfortable to lace in cotton, because you're not trying to hold on for dear life when you're knitting stockinette stitch and trying to get a very even, consistent gauge. So it makes things much, much easier. Also, when you're blocking lace, you tend to stretch it out a bit more open. And so even if you did get a little bit of tension and consistency, the blocking process was really going to help that. So yeah, lace, undersized, look for lightweight projects, and they're all going to make a really big difference. I should probably say as well, if you want to kind of see a little bit of this written up around it, yesterday we just released on my blog, carolfeller.com, just a blog post talking about knitting with cotton, and like some of the things I'm touching on here in the video. So you can see a little bit more on that, and also some links to some patterns that I think might work. So that kind of comes to me looking at patterns. Like over here, this is the first one, Dusty Roads, which I've re-knit in cotton, and you can see the length of it works pretty well. It is got a little bit of weight, but it's not so much that it gets terribly stretched. And again, if you're worried about it stretching vertically, you might, as you're knitting on it, you could always hang it overnight on a mannequin and check the length, so that you can accommodate it by even working it a little shorter, because you know it's going to stretch down a small bit. This is going to be another good one, the spritz stripes that I'm wearing. Again, it's lots of lace, so it's in a lightweight fabric, and just the whole texture and the structure, I think, would suit cotton yarn very, very well. And something else that people were asking me about over here is Carpino. This is the original one. It is very summer look today. Yes, it's warm here. It's lovely and warm and sunny outside, and so it felt really nice to have something a little bit lighter on. Elsa Louise May siesta top would be great as well. Yeah, that would also be very nice. And in fact, if anyone, the siesta top is one that was originally knit in a Debbie Bliss yarn. I don't remember the name of the yarn, but I know that it was a bamboo mix. And in fact, it was quite heavy, but because of the style of it, it seemed to work, and it kind of gave it a more slinky look, basically. Carpino here, which is in Brooklyn Tweeds. This is Brooklyn Tweeds Loft. If you wanted to do a cotton version of this again, I think would be pretty good, because the front of it has got this punchwork lace. It is fairly short style, shorter sleeves, and the yarn weight is long. This is knit in Loft, which is a fingering weight, a single ply woolen fingering weight. It's going to feel different, but it's still, I'm fairly sure, would work very well in a cotton. If you want a wool version, actually the Bloss Delight would work quite nicely for this as well, if you prefer a wool version of it. I don't have this pattern on my website, but you can get it from the Brooklyn Tweed website. And what other, I'm looking over here. They're the main things that actually come to me. I've never, in fact, knit a shawl or anything like that in cotton, simply because usually for me, shawls tend to be something that I wear in winter time and I want a bit warmer, so cotton seems a little counterproductive. But if you want it for summer wear, or somewhere where you just want to cover up your shoulders indoors in summertime and things like that, then cotton or linen would be a really nice option. The other place that I've used cotton before, and it was in fact where I started with all this, is when I started reknitting. I suppose it was, 14 years ago now, when my youngest, after my youngest was born. I found that cotton yarns were fantastic. There was kind of a couple of reasons. First of all, they're really cheap. Cotton yarns are much cheaper than equivalent wool yarns, and the quality is quite nice. You can even, for cheaper cottons, get pretty nice quality. The colors are fantastic, and if you've got sensitive kids who tend to run hot, cotton yarns are perfect, because they tend to be a little bit more durable. You can wash them. You can even, most of them will allow you to tumble dry them at a light temperature, which I tend not to. And I love stripes, so you can put loads and loads of colors. For kids' garments, I'm just obsessed with stripes. I used to put them in, and bright colors like oranges were one of my favorite, and stripes. So you could get a whole stack of different colors, and it's quite cost effective. So for kids' garments, I think it's fantastic. Someone was asking there about what about cotton bamboo yarns? I am not a huge fan of bamboo. And the reason for that, there's been a couple of times that I've done it for, sometimes it's been me experimenting with things, and other times it was the yarn that was given to me for a particular project in a book. And what I've found is, particularly if it's 100% bamboo or close to it, it stretches like nothing I've ever come across before. It feels lovely, it's got the most gorgeous feel, so if you want to do something like a shawl or something lightweight that you're not really having the weight hang down, it's fine. But bamboo, I've never ever encountered the kind of stretch that I've experienced, like to the extent that I could not wet block the garment to send off for the sample, because it grew so much that it wasn't possible. So I had to just steam block it in order to even out the stitches. So it might be just my own personal grudge about bamboo, and I am very hesitant to generalize, because I know that sometimes if it's put in a blend, it's probably going to counteract that a little. But bamboo by itself does stretch a lot, so that's just my experience. Someone up here, have you ever worked with corn yarn? No, I have not. In fact, I've never even come across a corn yarn. So I would be quite curious. I'm wondering, is it some kind of viscose? Because viscose often tends to be kind of almost the catch-all name for different plant fibers that are converted into a yarn. They kind of pulp them down and then create a yarn out of it. But I haven't ever knit with something in corn. So maybe one of these days I'll have to have a look around. So And if you have come across a coral yarn, let me know, because I would be curious. I always like to hear about new and interesting yarns. But in terms of then, why would you want to knit with cotton? For me, I just find it pleasant in summertime, is that, you know, things like lightweight cardigans in the summer feel really nice in cotton. So sometimes you made a pair of socks with it and they were very warm. Was that in the corn yarn? Ah, very interesting. Pop up the name of the yarn so I can look it up, because I would be very curious about that. And oh, I forgot to bring it up, but I think Citrus Dreams would be really nice as a cotton yarn as well. So it's a basic top-down simple raglan cardigan, summer cardigan, with 3/4 length sleeves and a cropped body. But what I kept thinking about is if you had most of it in a solid, fairly neutral color, and then you could end up introducing just the mini skeins in like 3-4 colors, and you could just have even a gradient of stripes going through the main color. I think would just be amazing. So if you're looking for interesting, fun ideas for summer cardigans, I think that could be a fun one, and you could play with color a little bit, somewhat risk-free. How about the Santa Rosa Plum cardigan? Yes, that's another one. The Santa Rosa Plum, the gauge would be correct. There's lace panels down the side. I would probably knit it ever so slightly shorter, I think, because it's not very long, but I think it comes down to kind of around here, so I'd worry about it stretching a little bit. But if you shortened it just a small bit, I think that would probably help counteract any stretch problems you'd have. But yeah, that would be lovely as well in the coral yarn. So they're my thoughts on cotton and knitting with cotton and summer knitting in general in bright sunshiny day today. Now, I promised you at the start of all this a giveaway of sorts. So it's not here on Instagram, it's on the website stolenstitches.com for any orders that are placed between today and the end of Sunday. So we're in April now, I think today is the 15th, so 15th to the end of the 18th. Orders over €50, I'm going to put everyone into a raffle, and I will be giving away a big kit of coral yarn. So it'll be a pack of 10 of one color and then 5 mini skeins of different colors. So for instance, if you wanted to knit the Citrus Dreams cardigan that I was talking about and experiment with some of those colors, you'd have plenty for all of the sizes going through with that, I think. So if you're thinking about ordering, this will be a good weekend to order something, because you're going to be entered into the draw. So anyway, thank you for joining me today on a nice sunny Thursday. Have a good day or good weekend or whatever time you're watching this. Bye everyone.